Hi, Zach. I was tidying my bookcase the other day and I thought I would share some of my favorite quilt books. So let's have a look at them. So this is the first one, Denyse Schmidt Quilts by Denyse Schmidt. I absolutely love Denyse Schmidt's fabrics, and I also really like her quilts. They're very modern, and they're also very, I don't know what you would call it, improv or intuitive quilts. So let's have a look. So in this book there's various stuff about how you get started with the quilting, and there are some other patchwork projects in there, like an oven mitt and a little soft toy. But what I really like are the quilts. So here's the first one. Can't really see it here, but if you look at this picture, it looks more like a Rothko painting, which I really like. I like that it's just so simple. And most of her quilts are, I guess, deceptively simple. And some of them are actually simple. So like this one, where it's just blocks of stripes of varying widths in 2 colors. I love looking at this book. Always find it really inspiring. I love this big zigzag quilt. Again, very simple but really effective. Next up is The Gentle Art of Quiltmaking by Jane Brocket. And this is another book with fairly simple quilts. And again, there's a section of how to get started and the various techniques that you need to know to do some quilting. And for each quilt there's a little bit about her design process for them. And there's some very pretty pictures of all the quilts in here. But sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see what they actually look like. But at the back there's a handy gallery, as you can see here. And what I really like is that for some of the quilts she's actually made more than one variation. So for example, this one called Beach Hut. So this one is also called Beach Hut Candy. And there's an ice cream version as well. So you see how the colors affect what the quilt looks like. And one thing that the quilts in this book I think do really well is let the fabric speak for themselves. All the patterns are fairly simple, made up of strips or squares. In this case, I don't know if you can see that they're on point, and there's some diamond shapes. So this one here called Russian Shawl, and there's actually 2 of them. It really gives the fabrics room to shine, especially these with these large floral patterns. And I really like that, because sometimes you have a favorite fabric and it is a large print, and once you start cutting into it, especially if you're using like small little elements or blocks, you lose the effect of the quilt or of the fabric. So I really like that her fabrics are so simple and there's room for the fabrics. Right, the next book is Quilt Improv by Lucie Summers. And as you can probably guess, it's all about improvising when making your quilts. So the way this book is structured is that there are a number of blocks, building blocks as she calls them, which you can then use to make various quilts. And there are some quilts in here that you could replicate, but of course, since it is an improv book, why not make your own? So let's have a look at some of the blocks. This one I really like, and it's really fun to vary the thickness of the strips that you use to make these blocks. And here's just a bunch of squares or rectangles, all different sizes. And this one I really like. It's called Portholes. And it's a way to make some really nice circles. So let's have a look. And again, in this book, she talks about the inspiration for the various quilts. And there are things like pictures of what inspired it. So this one is called the shoebox quilt. And then there's a picture of some shoeboxes that inspired it, and some sketches. And then there's how to construct a quilt. So there's all these various quilts, and Lucie really likes bright colors, so that is what you see in these quilts. But of course you can use the techniques to make the quilts in any color you like. I think this is a really inspiring book. Whenever I feel like I want to make something quilty but I don't know what, I usually grab this book to get some ideas. This book is more about technique than about quilts. So it's called All Points Patchwork, and it's by Diane Gilleland. And it's all about English paper piecing. And what makes this book really great is, of course, there's a section about the sort of general getting started with things. But in the book, Diane goes really in depth with how to get the best result with English paper piecing and how to put them together and things like that. And there are tips for drawing shapes yourself and cutting them out and things like that. But a great chunk of the book is about individual shapes or types of shapes that you can use to make hexagon, or not hexagon, I said that because I'm working on an English paper piecing project where I'm using Hexagon. And I guess the word is right there. So all the different types of shapes you can use in your English paper piecing. So here, for example, we have the half hexagons. And here's some diamonds. And she includes things like this, to flag or not to flag. Don't worry if you don't know what that means, but it's very helpful if you're working on an English paper piecing project. So the book does not have instructions for projects. It's not that kind of book, but it does have quite a lot of projects for inspiration. And again, here you can see you get very detailed advice on how to join shapes, in this case diamonds and jewels. And she also includes ideas for how you can combine the shapes or just the shape itself to create patterns, which is really interesting, I think. So if you're looking to start an English paper piecing project that's not just hexagons, I would get a copy of this book. I think that you will find that really helpful. And there's also a section for curved shapes, which I've never actually attempted. I'm not sure that I would, because it looks a little bit fiddly. And I'm not really great with precise points, to be honest. Next up is the Improv Handbook for Modern Quilters by Sherri Lynn Wood. And this book is sort of similar to the one by Lucie Summers, that it has what she calls quilt scores, so kind of like music scores. That are so like a set of instructions for how you can construct a whole quilt. It's not blocks, it's how you construct a whole quilt. And what I really like about this book is there's an example that Sherri has made, but then there's also 2 or 3 made by other people using the same score. And I think it's really fun to see how different people interpret the same set of instructions. So like this one, it's very colorful. But then there's these ones that are almost monochrome. And the way that they're put together look completely different as well. And what about this one, which is just a riot of color and different fabrics, and they're quite narrow bits of fabric. And these 3 are made to the same score, but they have a completely different vibe. And I just find that endlessly fascinating. I suppose you can say that about any quilt pattern. You're never replicating a quilt exactly as it is in the pattern. You use different colors, different prints. Maybe you cut some of the fabrics a little bit to the wrong size and you have to improvise and make it bigger. So there's, I can't remember, 10 or 12 of the scores. in the book. I love these ones here, the curves. I have tried to make something like this, but I find curves really difficult. Maybe one day I'll figure it out. And in the book there are also these tips for how to work with a quilt, and I suppose any creative project, and questions to ask yourself so that you're not focused on whether what you have made is, I don't know if you would call it a mistake, but maybe with room for improvement, but rather she focuses on what you can learn from it, which I really like. So if you're looking to try some improv quilting, I think you will like this book. There's also a section about exploring color, how you can put color together, and lots of tips for troubleshooting, especially with the curves. This next book is not a quilting book, it's a book about quilts. So it's called Unconventional and Unexpected, and it's by Roderick Kiracofe. And he is a quilt collector, so he has a lot of quilts. And in this book there are some essays about quilting. One of them is actually by Denyse Schmidt, whose book we saw before. And then there's lots of pictures of various quilts from his collection. And most of them, if not all of them, are made from fabrics like these jeans here that you just have at home. And they're not very accurate like these ones. They're very wonky, and I really like that. And they have weird edges and just made up of anything that whoever made the quilt had to hand. But that's not to say that they're just randomly thrown together. You can see that a lot of them are made with thought and a design in mind. It's just that maybe they didn't have the materials that would make the designers, I don't know, as precise as you might want. Just look at this red and white one. And I love this little flower that's appliqued in the middle. So there's a lot of inspiration in this book. Whether you're making quilts traditionally or more precisely, or you're working on a more improv style quilt. And again, this is one of those books where if I want some inspiration, I'll have a look through this. And this quilt, for example, I don't like the colors at all. But just now as I turned the page, I noticed that in amongst all these strips, there is one little block here. I think it's the courthouse steps block, which I think is really fun. That you have all these elements that are more or less the same, and then you have one that is not at all the same. So I love this, that they're quilts made from whatever people had to hand, any old scraps they had, and even these yo-yos. I mean, that's such a fun effect. So if you like looking at quilts that are not super precise and then are made from everyday household textiles, I think you'll really like this book. The quilts in the book are from between, I think it's on the cover, yeah, 1950 to 2000, so fairly recent. I think he's written another book where the quilts are older. I think. I'll put it on the screen if he has, and it's not just something I'm making up in my head. The last book is this one, Wise Craft Quilts by Blair Stocker, which actually has a foreword by Denyse Schmidt. So you can see there's sort of a thread through some of the books I have. I really like Denyse Schmidt. So this book, as it says, is a guide to turning beloved fabrics into meaningful patchwork. And again, this book has an introduction, and at the back there's a section with how to do all the quilty techniques you need to know. But most of the book is devoted to the quilts. And one thing I really appreciate in this book is that, of course, there's a nice style picture of each quilt, but then there's also a nice big picture where you can see what the whole thing looks like flat, which is especially useful for the quilts in this book because most of them are not, they don't have a repeating pattern as some quilts do. So this one, for example, is made up of fabric swatches. I think she was given a suitcase of old tailor swatches or something, and then she turned it into this quilt. And all the quilts are made up of various, especially clothing, like this baby quilt that's made of baby clothes, which makes for a very nice keepsake. And then there's a Boro inspired quilt. And a lot of the quilts in here, they do have a sort of improv feel to them. So I don't often make a quilt pattern in a book. I usually just sort of make stuff up. But I've actually made two from this book. I made this one. So in the book it's made up of denim, I think old jeans. But the one I made is completely different, but I really like the block here. And the other one I have made, let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah, it's this one. So this is made, I think it was made from Blair's husband's shirts, his work shirts. And I did the same thing. I for years I've been saving my husband's shirts with the idea that I would use them to make a quilt, and I used this pattern. The quilt I made, I think, is bigger than this one. Let's just see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Yeah, I think mine is 7 blocks by 7 blocks. So I also added in just some plain squares of fabric. I think mainly because I got fed up with making these star blocks. And I wanted to speed up the process. But I really like this design, and I like it with using the shirts for it. I think that goes really well together. And I think that's a common thing for all these quilts, that the design or the style of quilt really goes well with the type of fabrics used for them. I like this one, using toile fabric. It's beautiful. And this one, which is made with cyanotype printed fabric. It's beautiful blue colors. So this is sort of a hybrid of the type of quilting book I like. It does have some patterns in here, but they're fairly simple. A lot of them are with fairly large blocks, so there's room for the fabrics to show off. But they also have an improv feel to a lot of the patterns. So in my little sewing room, I haven't got room for a lot of books, but this one lives in here so that I can always grab it and have a look through it. So that's all the books. Which one would you buy or get from the library? And of course, now that I've been looking through the books, I really want to start a new quilt. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. I hope you enjoyed looking through these books. And I hope you have a great day.